going to be sharing how to make a very easy present for your pets. It can be used as a blanket, a bed, a mat, a little lap blanket for you to hold a small pet. It's really versatile and it's a nice size. Stay tuned to the end of the video because I will show you a guinea pig and a cat on a blanket this size, just so you can get an idea of the scale. However, I did want to mention that this is a blanket for pets who know how to use blankets and it's safe to use blankets with. For example, I would not give this to a chinchilla or any other animal that could overheat because it's double layer fleece and you don't want an animal prone to overheating going under this. One really nice thing about this blanket is it's completely reversible and it looks nice on both sides. If you're a beginner sewer, don't be overwhelmed by this because it is really easy to make. It looks professional and really nice when you're done, and you can just be really happy with yourself and more confident in your sewing skills. The hardest part may be finding a fabric you like. Go in a store that has lots of fleece and have fun looking for a fleece that you like. What's really nice about this project is that in setting this up for sewing, we're only going to do 3 cuts. That's great. Some people who are really confident with their sewing might not make any cuts, but I do want to make this look really nice, so I'm going to go ahead and make these 3 cuts. If you look at the words on the selvage, they can tell you which side is the right side of the fabric. Now you can tell this a lot of the times because the wrong side is going to look kind of blurry. But if you want to have that added assurance that you know which side is the right side, you can look for these. Then if you want, you can mark the right side with a piece of masking tape or something. Just, if you're a beginner sewer, I wanted to add that little tip just so you can do this with confidence and not worry about which side is the right or wrong side. The first cuts are the selvage, and they will be along both short ends. These were the edges that were not cut at the store when you had the fabric cut. In my case, this is white, so it's very easy to see. And I'm just going to cut this off on both ends, and we'll meet back for the next step. I am back. Hopefully that went well for you. It went well for me. Next thing we're going to do is figure out which side is the wrong side and which side is the right side, which hopefully you know from the last step. This side is the wrong side on mine because it is blurry and it just looks wrong. So hopefully your fabric is obvious too. Then the right side looks more crisp and nicer. What we're going to do is create kind of a sandwich now by folding this fabric in half. And I want the right sides touching each other. So we're going to have the wrong sides out. And when I say fold it in half, I don't mean the skinny way, but the long way. So it's now should be looking a little bit like a blanket. Alright, and just to verify, you want to check and double check and make 100% sure that you have the wrong side out. The wrong side is what you should be looking at. Once you have this perfectly lined up, which I don't yet because I'm trying to show you on a couch and I'll be sure to fix it better later. But once you get this completely lined up as perfectly as you can, you're going to cut along this fold. And of course make sure the fold is straight and you're going to cut along the fold. Now a lot of people who sew may be in the comments saying, you do not have to do that cut. And that's perfectly correct. You can just sew along 3 sides and not cut this. But the way I am, I will look at the blanket afterward and I will notice that one of the sides wasn't cut. If you don't care and you know what you're doing and you know that won't bother you, don't cut it. To give an example with the blanket that's already finished, you can tell that this has been cut because there's this line going through it. If I had done an edge that hadn't been cut, this line would not be going through because this would just be folded over. So if you don't mind that one of the sides looking different, you can save yourself from having to cut that edge. Just looking at this blanket that I completed in the past, I can tell I cut every edge. So yeah, personal preference, but for me, I do prefer to have all the edges cut. After that cut, you'll have two separate pieces of fabric, and we are done cutting the fabric. The only caveat to that, I would say, is that if the store cut your fabric really crooked, you might want to even it out a little bit. Fleece is forgiving if it's not really bad, so don't worry about it too much, but if it's really, really bad and you want to, you can even things up a little bit. In sewing, I'm not a good pinner, but I do think it's helpful to make it look nice if you do pin it. Especially since this is meant for pets, I recommend these clips. Then you don't have to worry about using pins near your pets or accidentally leaving one in the blanket, which would be even worse. I'm going to put these clips all around the blanket, and also make sure you leave a gap somewhere on this because we're going to have to turn it right side out after sewing it. So you can't sew all four sides completely shut or you won't be able to turn it right side out. It does not have to be a big gap. Just as much as you want to give yourself for turning something like this, it doesn't have to be huge. Just enough to reach your hand in and pull. But anyway, I'm going to go put the clips around here. I added clips all the way around, and in this area I put two red clips to hopefully remind myself not to sew that spot. And that means that this is the start area. I'm going to go all the way around, and this is the stop, leaving this open. Seam allowance is not really important with this project. Just do something that makes sense to you and is easy for you to do. An easy way is just to have the edge of your sewing machine foot here, as long as it's like a standard foot. That way you don't have to worry about looking at lines or worrying that you're off or anything, especially if you're a beginner sewer. That can be an easy way to do it. But I will be back after this is sewn. I forgot to mention what type of thread I like to use. If you are experienced at sewing, completely ignore my advice and use what you like, okay? But I like to match the thread to the fabric. And since this is not a cotton, I would use a polyester thread. I just feel like it's a little bit stronger than a cotton, and the cotton might rip out a little bit easier than a polyester thread would. So now I'm going to actually go sew this. And also, as you are sewing, make sure you remove the clips as you go. So that's kind of important. Don't leave them on and break your needle. Remove them as you go. But yeah, I think that's it. I hope that's it. I'll be back after I've sewn this. Fleece can shift around a little bit as you sew, and for the most part that's okay. But what I recommend because of that is to turn your work over and look at the back, the side that you weren't sewing on, and just make sure that the fabric was caught all the way around and that you have enough seam allowance left that you feel comfortable. Here's an example of where that happened with mine. There's not a lot here, but it's still enough that I'm not concerned about it. This next step is optional, but it will hopefully make the corners sit a little bit nicer on the blanket. So I recommend it if you're willing to do it, but it is another scissors related step. Here's a corner of the fabric, and if you don't cut this part off, it can get a little bunchy feeling in the corners of the blanket. Be very, very careful not to go into the stitching itself, but cut the diagonal off like that. And do that in all four corners. The moment of truth. Did you remember to leave a hole for turning? Find the hole that you left for turning, and you're going to turn this entire thing right side out now. Just reach in there, grab a little bit of it, and then start turning it out. And then reach in again, push out corners, do everything you can to make it as flat as possible. It's starting to look like a blanket, and hopefully you're feeling really proud of yourself. But here's the crummy part, hand sewing. I'm not a fan of hand sewing. I know there are a lot of people who would do this by machine, but I'm the type of person who I can tell if it's been done by machine. I recommend doing a hand-stitched ladder stitch to close this opening. A ladder stitch will hide it. I've shown how to do a ladder stitch on this channel before, so I'm not going to go into it. You can also look it up if you don't know how to do it, but it's very easy. Don't feel intimidated, and it's not a ton of hand sewing. You know, it's just whatever you left for your hand to reach in. And after you have sewn this hole shut, let's meet back here for the next step. After ladder better stitching that turning hole closed, you may be thinking, isn't this done? Because it looks done. But there's something about this blanket that just doesn't look finished yet. And there is a huge difference between this blanket and this blanket. Hopefully you can see it even just a little bit. Something looks off with the cat blanket. That's because the dog blanket has a top stitch going all the way around. The cat blanket, on the other hand, doesn't have top stitching, so it can kind of open in weird ways and it doesn't lie flat and nicely like the dog blanket does. But this is really easy, so don't get stressed out or anything. It's probably one of the easiest parts of making this blanket, and the whole thing has been easy, let's be honest. Basically, to do a top stitch, all you do is do a top stitch. And I believe one thing that I use, which is really helpful, is just the metal plate on my sewing machine as the guide for how wide to make it. I don't know if you'll be able to see too well, but it's right here on this blanket. When you're sewing, you want to make sure that you're holding the blanket completely flat with it as turned out as it possibly can be. So that's the only thing that's a little bit tricky to get right. So you kind of want to, fiddle with that a little bit till you are perfectly sure that it's flat. Hopefully that looks different than this, for example, because I've made sure to fold it out as much as I possibly can. And then I'm just going to stitch in a ways, going all the way around, and this time you don't leave a turning hole or anything, you just stitch all the way around, all four sides. And I will be back to show you how that makes just a little bit more polished look for the blanket. Okay, it is done! However, the same as when we stitched before, I would recommend turning it over and making sure you are happy with the stitching on both sides of the blanket before you deem it completely done. Also, I have not done this yet, but I would recommend putting it in with a wash, get it all clean and extra fluffy for your pet before you give it to them. Now let's go to trying it out with a couple of pets to help you see the scale. Here it is with a guinea pig. It's very large, and I think if you have small pets, it would be nice as a lap blanket to hold them. And here it is with a cat for a size comparison. I hope you have a lot of fun making these and that your pets love them too. Merry Christmas! Bye!